Hey, it's Kelly here. And today you're hearing about a challenge so fresh that Asia Pacific World Surf League boss Andrew Stark had to pick up the phone and give me the update. So if you haven't listened to the full curveball episode with Andrew Stark, where he talks about the adversity that shaped him and really made him into the bloke that professionalised Australian surfing, you absolutely should go back and listen to that before you hear this update. But Andrew Stark had to make a tough leadership decision recently. He had to make the risky call to can two of the biggest events in the Australian surfing calendar, Bells Beach and Snapper Rocks, in order to secure 4 other events. But to secure those events in Australia, he'd have to convince various governments to allow him to land a charter plane full of American surfers in Australia and to create a quarantine bubble. Talk about a curveball. And if he couldn't pull it off, well, the entire World Surf League would have to be cancelled. Andrew Stark, the last time you walked out of my studio, you were off to try and keep the World Surf Tour alive. What has happened since you left the studio?
Oh, look, what's happened is probably the most career-defining month of my whole career, business-wise, and it's been incredibly challenging to achieve what we have, and that was that we really needed to add a World Tour event into Australia to make it 4 events. We needed to land a charter flight into Australia with international athletes, and get the tour back operational. And that also meant that we had to bring on 3 new events and look at a way to de-risk with all state border closures and so on. So it's been a very, very difficult time, but we've got there and we're ready to go now with our events. So there's usually 3 events in Australia, and this year for the first time we've actually added an event. And we did that because we had a cancellation of the Sunset Beach Hawaii event and the Santa Cruz San Francisco event. So once we got off to a bad start, we wanted to have 3 events of our 10-event world tour done by early February, and we got 1 done in December, and then the next 2 were cancelled, and then they were coming to Australia after that, and we decided to add an event. But getting into this country right now is extremely difficult. The Australian borders are firmly shut, and trying to get international athletes and key staff into the country was incredibly challenging. And there was only one state in the country that ended up saying, yes, we'll land your charter plane. That actually enabled us to have 4 events here. But the process to get the charter to be able to land, I think if you ask yourself the question, and then as I did to many mentors, it's like, I've got to ask the government to land a charter flight full of internationals in mid-January to late January, when all the new COVID strains were hitting UK and South African strains that were making governments extremely nervous. But also, the publicity and PR of the tennis and all of those internationals coming in was a disaster at the time. It's proven to be quite successful, and they've run the Australian Open tennis quite well. But at the time, the public sentiment to international athletes coming in was not good. So, yeah, it was really difficult to manoeuvre our way through dealing with multiple state governments and stakeholders on a very, very tight time frame to really try and keep the World Surf League Tour alive this year and crown world champions.
One of the first things you did was head to Lennox on the north coast of New South Wales to try to stage an event there. What happened?
Yeah, the Lennox thing was interesting, and certainly was a curveball. What happened was we knew that the Victorian government had notified us that that we were not going to land the charter flight. And then we'd had a no from Queensland and Western Australia as well to the charter. So all of our eggs were in New South Wales. And I was lucky enough to have a relationship with the Deputy Premier, John Barilaro, who, in these times, you actually need a champion in government to really push things through. And he was that, and he was very bullish and about helping us and sincere about saying, hey, let's help you get the World Tour up in Australia. And, that enabling of landing the charter flight, also part of that deal was we're going to bring a World Tour event to New South Wales. And the fact that the plane landed in New South Wales meant the first event needed to be there, which meant Bells Beach, that was the first event, which is, 60 years of history, amazing wave. It's like the Wimbledon of surfing. Our positioning was we wanted to replace Bells Beach with an absolute blockbuster wave. And, the best wave on the East Coast or on the whole New South Wales coastline, when you think about a World Championship Tour standard event, is Lennox Head. And look, we knew that we'd have challenges there because about 15 years ago, Rip Curl were running the Search event World Tour sort of roaming license around the world. They tried to go to Lennox, and the town at that point said, no, we don't want it. Now, I did some initial investigations with the mayor and some councillors and the local board riders, and the intel we were getting this time around was it's a different town, far more populated, it's progressed, we'll welcome your World Tour event into town. What a great economic stimulus mid-COVID and all the rest of it. And so we pushed, and look, the timeframes we've been operating on are in some ways ridiculous. We're asking councils to give us permits within a week of asking, and we're having to move at such lightning speed. When you move at speed, you fail sometimes too. You've got to fail quickly and move on and be incredibly agile. But look, the Lennox situation was that a minority group of people got very loud very quickly, and they lent hard on the councillors to say no. And we had a live council meeting that I had to present on a Wednesday afternoon a couple of weeks back, and the council at lunchtime I was being told we're going to vote it in, and by 4 o'clock in the afternoon 8 of 10 councillors voted no to the Lennox event, which that's was challenging and difficult and surprising, especially economically. These events deliver 10 to 15 million in economic development to a region, and so look, all we could do was move on incredibly quickly. PR wise wasn't great, but we moved, and great leadership from our global CEO, Eric Logan, who I was talking to, a few times a day at this point, saying, Andrew, okay, we tried, we didn't get the permit, where are we going? And we very quickly moved to, well, okay, sure, we didn't get it there, but now let's focus on where we're going next in the solution. And we had a permit secured within 24 hours with Newcastle on the Thursday. We announced it on the Saturday morning. So talk about quick moving and so on. So, yeah, look, it was a difficult one, but we got through it.
How concerned are you about public opinion in staging these events? As you mentioned, the Gold Coast event won't happen. Bell's hugely iconic event internationally won't happen. You'll have 2 in WA, 2 in New South Wales. But we are faced with a situation where the public, rightly or wrongly, don't want people from other countries that are COVID hotspots coming into Australia. How confident are you that the quarantine bubble put around these athletes will work?
I'm incredibly confident because the athletes, when they fly into Sydney, will go into the New South Wales Health full government 14-day lockdown quarantine. So they won't be allowed out of quarantine unless they're completely cleared, the same way an Australian returning is. So we're not asking for any special training regimes like the tennis players had in Melbourne. It's just a straight, hard 14-day lockdown quarantine. So when they get out, they'll be clean. And as we know, Australia and the States at the moment are fairly clean of coronavirus, so we should be fine.
Are you disappointed with the response of the Victorian government about Bells Beach, considering the Melbourne Open went ahead? I mean, what was their rationale that you couldn't and they could?
Oh, look, I think we're more understanding and respectful. I think you got to sort of, everyone has some ways a short memory in the context of COVID, but it wasn't so long ago, and I'm talking months ago, that entire city and that entire state was in full lockdown for 3 months, and there was 800 deaths, and, they were in an absolute crisis. So when the Victorian government said to us, we can't land your charter and we can't provide a pre-approved bubble to move into our state in the event that our borders shut at the time we need to, we were understanding and respectful. Sure, the tennis happened, but the tennis were ahead of us. They approved the tennis back in sort of December, and they all landed early January. And and when we were asking, it was in the middle of the tennis and all the sort of fiasco around that when the athletes came in. So sometimes it's about timing. I think that the Victorian government certainly saw an outcry from the broader community and the media in Victoria to say, hey, we love Bells Beach, make sure you keep it. And but look, generally speaking, no, we're not upset with the government. We understand and respect that they've got to make decisions to protect their people at the moment, and that's what's the most paramount thing for these states.
Well, I'm interested in how this has impacted on you as a leader. As you said, your boss in America knew that you would have to pull off now 4 events instead of 3 in difficult circumstances in order for the whole circuit to go ahead. How stressful has this been, and what's been the leadership lesson for you?
Yeah, look, incredibly stressful. And I think the best thing from a leadership working with our global CEO is that he really trusted and empowered me. And, we had that chat early on to say, hey, I'm going to need the oxygen and space to really get this done. And he was incredibly supportive in that mechanism. With the team of people here, we had, it wasn't an individual effort. It was a team effort of people here. And, we had to get 4 event permits, 3 of them brand new events. We had to land a charter. We had to deal with Home Affairs to get exemptions of athletes and 120 visas rushed through, and we had to work on the comms. We had to cancel 2 events in 2 states, and the amount of work we did in the last month was actually a year's worth of work. Things like event permits usually take 3 to 6 months, and we're putting them together in a week, and deals with governments and all that sort of thing. So I think the lesson was we over-communicated as a team. We accepted that we're going to fail when we're moving this quickly, and we're just going to move on really quickly. And I think that the one thing was performance mindset, and just really focusing on not necessarily the result. We were all aligned and we knew what the result was. We had to get 4 events stood up. We had to land a plane in Australia with the internationals and get 4 events stood up and de-risk those events so that if state borders shut, we could still operate them. And so the result was there. But what I continually said to the team here was it's task by task, day by day. You've got to focus on the tasks. If you obsess on the result, you won't get the result. Just go task by task, and we tick them off. And if we fail, we move on quickly. And so the performance mindset aspect of just not being distracted by the things that aren't in your control, just accept those things you can't control the controllable, so to speak, and be very, very task orientated. And if you drill down to a more simplistic performance mindset like that, when these stressful moments come, that's what got us through. And yeah, that's easier said than done, because when you're very stressed and you're working, 16, 18-hour days, and you're working 7 days a week and people are getting pushed, you can really be distracted by things that you shouldn't be. But you've just got to keep reminding yourself of the need to stay focused on what matters. And what matters is just getting the task done that will lead you to the result. A little bit like an Olympic athlete, if they obsess about the gold medal, they'll never win it. But if they obsess about each training session, which is the task, then they will win.
What was the thing that you sort of said to your wife, at 11:30 p.m. when you couldn't sleep and you thought, shit, I can't pull this off?
Yeah, look, my wife was incredibly supportive, and she's so understanding about reading the play with me as a person. We know each other intimately, and she could see how much pressure I was under and how stressed I was. And, and you miss moments with kids, and you're quite distant through these really intense periods. And Belinda was great in the context of just being there as a support mechanism, in terms of just saying, hey, Andrew, if anyone can do this, you can. And you know that most people probably think you can't do it. And you also know that that's what drives you. And she's right. If you tell me I can't do something, it generally drives me. And a lot of people that know me intimately will sort of gear me and push me in that way. But I think having that support when you're lying in bed at night, to know that you've got that there, and that someone really believes in you. And, she also said to me, which was interesting, you're geared for this, Andrew. You're actually an executive and a CEO that actually, you don't want this all the time, because you'd blow up if you worked at this sort of intensity, but you're geared for it. you're great in a crisis. This is when you're at your best. So embrace it and accept it. So she was, my wife's a mentor to me in many ways, and is in many cases more aware about me than I am myself.
Andrew, it's been an incredible 12 months, but an incredible month for you. Thanks for keeping us up to date with the leadership challenges you've faced.
No worries. Yeah, it's been a roller coaster ride, and that's what life's about.
If you missed the main episode with Australia's World Surf League boss Andrew Stark, it's right there in your feed now. And I'd love you to subscribe to Curveball so you're alerted each time a new episode comes out. Our inbox is always open. Please suggest a guest that you'd love to hear from, and we'll get them to give you their leadership tips. Or just tell us about your own curveball moment. Send an email to hello@deadsetstudios.com. You can visit curveballshow.com to hoover up all our episodes. And we also have a Curveball newsletter on LinkedIn too. We'll send you one email each weekend that focuses on a different leader and the things they've learned when scaling, adapting, pivoting, or smashing a ceiling. Curveball is made by the production company Dead Set Studios, and this episode was produced by me, Kelly Reardon, and executive producer Rachel Fountain.